Welcome back to Not So Grand Garage. Today I'm out in the shop working on the Suzuki project. Today I'm going to be tearing into the front end on this thing. I'll be doing front brakes, so calipers, rotors, pads, brake hoses, stuff like that. I'll also be doing wheel bearings, wheel seals. We'll go through the hubs, check everything over, and go from there. So slowly but surely this project's coming along, so let's get at it. If you've been following along on this project, on part one, we tore into the rear end on this thing and went through, replaced wheel bearings, wheel seals, brakes, the works. So we're working our way to the front now. I've already been working on replacing brake lines. So we've got brake lines, new brake lines ran front to back. I still have to run the front lines and the lines off the master cylinder over, but ran out of brake lines. So have some of that on order and decided to just go on and tear into the front and get that wrapped up. Once this is done, then we'll be talking to the owner and seeing what direction he wants to go as far as the lift kit for it. He's already got tires for it, things like that. So quite a few things to do, but yeah, let's go on and tear into this front end and see what we've got. Now, anticipating this job, I went on and ordered rotors for the front, which these are Power Stop Evolutions. They are coated, which is mainly the reason I got them. Let's see if I can get these out. They've got this coating on them that doesn't rust up. It looks a lot better over time, which not really a huge concern for this, but it's just a little extra step. And price-wise, these were just a couple dollars more than cheapies at the parts store, so went this route instead. We got Rebestos brake lines, Wagner pads, centric calipers, and National oil seals for the front. I try and go with National or SKFs as far as seals go, but yeah. So I'll go on and start tearing this apart and see what I've got. I'm hoping that the bearings are in good shape, because price-wise I think they're $25 or $30 each, and there's 4 of them. So if we can get away with not spending that money on parts, the owner would appreciate it. So let's get at it. Well, had to bust out the Ratchet Breaker 9000 to get these broke loose, because you know, putting lug nuts on with a 3/4 inch breaker bar is the ideal thing to do. So anyways, got the tire off finally, and as you can see, the rotor's pretty chewed up, so kind of glad I did that. Pad's got a little bit of life left in them, but yeah, not too worried there. The hoses are actually in decent shape. They look like they've probably been replaced, but while we're here, we're gonna replace it all. And gonna tear this hub apart and check out the wheel bearings and replace the inner wheel seal for sure, repack everything. But looks like we might have a broken bolt here, or it may just be missing, so I'll take a look there. I'll have to take a look around and see how these hubs come apart, because they're all different, but I'll do that real quick and get it torn down. So if you're just doing a brake job, tools you'll need: 7mm hex drive, Allen wrench, whatever you want to call it, to take out the 2 bolts for the caliper mounts. The hose will need to be loose or come completely off to get to this bolt, because the hose crosses over the top of the bolt. But yeah, calipers are the same both sides, so no issues there. You can't get them mixed up. And once you get that off, we'll see about pulling this rotor off. Once you've got the caliper off the mount, which it just slides straight up, the pads just sit down on these little rails here, front and back. You'll need 17mm socket for the caliper bracket bolts. So pull both of those out. They will be tight, so typically people will put red Loctite on them, something like that. So you may want to heat up that bolt a little bit with a propane torch or something. It won't take a whole lot. That'll make it easier to knock them bolts loose. Once the bracket comes off, the rotor should be ready to pop off. Once your caliper bracket is off, if the rotor doesn't just slide off, you can tap on it on the back side right here, spin it a little bit, tap on the back side to get it to break loose from around the hub, and it should come off. So if you're just doing a brake job, that's pretty well where you would stop, but I would suggest you're already that far. Go on and pull the hub apart, check the wheel bearings, repack them, replace that wheel seal, and then you know you'll be good to go for a long time. But yeah, we're going to tear into this hub. So as I thought, we've got a broken bolt right here. So I'm going to see if I can get that out and replace it while I'm here. But you remove the 6 bolts and this cap pops right off. And inside under the cap, you will find a circlip that goes around the axle shaft. It just holds the axle shaft in place. It keeps it from walking out. So take the circlip off and then remove the outer bolts, and this section will pop off. So when you remove these outer bolts, you'll notice they will have little conical washers on them. Do not misplace them, they're important. But yeah, this hub now pops off, and we're left with the big nut there that holds the wheel bearings in place. So we'll back this off. The bearings in this thing feel good, but as you can tell, the grease is nasty. I'm gonna go on and pull it apart and clean those bearings up real well. Might throw them in the ultrasonic cleaner, get all that old grease and nastiness out of them. Repack them with fresh grease, clean up the races, make sure everything looks good. Replace that inner wheel seal and put it back together. Now ready to pull the outer nut. You'll notice it's got a little staked tab in place, a little safety deal to keep this nut from backing off. So you'll fold this tab up and this nut should back off pretty easy. They are not super tight, typically speaking. So got the outer nut off, which what I thought, it was pretty well hand tight. I mean, took a little bit of nudging to break it loose initially, but spun right off. Then the little lock ring that holds the nut in place. We've got another nut in there, so that one is just hand tight. So we'll spin it out. This grease has definitely had some water in it, but we knew that going in. That was one of the owner's concerns, because this had been through some deep water. So inner nut is off, and now the hub is free. We will pull these bearings out, take a good look at them. We'll check the races as well, make sure there's no grooves or any odd wear going on there, and clean everything up and repack it. Got everything apart, and everything on this end looks good. Threads look good and everything. So down here, the races look good. There's some little bit of lines, vertical lines, but that is just from me pulling the bearing out. It's just grease lines. So the races are good. The bearings themselves don't have any flat spots on the rollers. There's no signs of heat or anything like that. They're not super loose or anything. Nothing standing out, so I'd say we're good to reuse them. So I'm going to wipe as much grease as I can off of this and dump all the parts right into the ultrasonic cleaner. Let that run for 45 minutes to an hour, get all the old grease and stuff out of them. I'll repack the bearings with a good synthetic grease, and we'll replace the inner wheel seals, which are on the back side of the hubs, which you have to pull that out to pull that inner bearing out anyways, so you'll have to replace them. But yeah, get it all cleaned up, get new grease put in it, and get it put back together. And this side should pretty well be done. I've got the basket of the ultrasonic cleaner, so I'm going to put the entire hub assembly in the basket, as well as our inner and outer wheel bearings, which these bearings are the same front and back, or inner and outer. On this, they use the same bearings. I'm going to go on and put the locking hub components in here, as well as the nuts and safety washer. I'm going to leave the C-clip and the little bolts out because I don't really want to lose them, or I don't want to have to keep track of those. And the inner part of the hub, which we will be re-greasing all of this and making sure it's good to go. I want to get all this cleaned up, and the ultrasonics should do a really good job. So we'll go on and drop that in, which I need to change this fluid out. It is just purple power in this case. But let's see if I can drop this in here one-handed, like, without making a big mess. There we go. Which fluid is pretty warm. Go on, put the lid back on. I'm gonna turn the heat up a little bit and set it for 30 minutes. I'll probably run this through twice, but yeah, that part should come out looking pretty clean, and we'll make sure to get all the excess stuff out of them when they come out. They don't come out spotless, but yeah, you'll have to rinse them off, so on and so forth. Go on and re-grease everything and check those bearings really well, check the races really well, and start putting it back together, and it should be good to go. So I got everything out of the ultrasonic cleaner and gave it a good wipe down. All the races look good. The bearings look good. So I'll still need to take a razor blade or something like that, clean all the RTV off, because it does not take that off. But yeah, everything looks good. So I'm going to repack the bearings, put the new seal on, and get this put back together the same way it came apart. And then we will go on and install our new brakes and get everything set up there, and this side will be good to go. I won't bore you with the other side because it's identical to this side. So yeah, let's get this wrapped up. Got the spindle cleaned off and the wheel seal put into place. So this hub is ready to go back on. I've also got the outer bearing already packed, ready to go. So now we'll just start sliding it back together. The inner nut for the bearing goes on hand tight. It does not take much to hold that in place. Don't crank it down or anything like that. Then your little safety washer goes on, and the outside nut actually has a torque spec. So both bearings are in place. Next up is the washer. Hard to do this one-handed, but hey, come on, there it goes. Walk that all the way back against the bearing. Make sure it's seated. Then the inner nut goes on next. Now what I like to do with these is spin them by hand as you run this nut down real snug, and then back it off. And then you just tighten it up finger tight, and that's all it gets. That way it seats the bearings in there with all the new grease and everything. But yeah, after you do that, the lock washer goes in place, then the outer nut, and the outer nut gets tightened down pretty good, and then you fold your tab over to hold the lock nut in place, and you're pretty well done as far as the hub's concerned. So I just checked a few things, and the inner nut does actually have a torque spec of 10 foot-pounds. The outer nut has a torque spec between 43.5 and 65 foot-pounds. So I don't know if I've got a socket big enough for this. If I do, I will go on and torque that to spec. If not, I'll run it down finger tight, go just a little extra, and call it good. Got the hub mostly back together. I was able to start working this bolt here that had been broke off out with a center punch, sharp center punch. You can see the little tabs that I've caught and worked it on around to the point where it's stuck out far enough now I can take a pair of needle nose and carefully turn it out. So it takes a little bit of patience, but it's not impossible for sure. You can also use, if this method doesn't work, you can center punch it and you try a left-handed drill bit, or use some easy outs, just pre-drill the center of the hole. Just be sure you get the drill centered when you do that. But yeah, there we go. I'll have to get another bolt for that one. That's not a big deal. So we'll finish up putting this hub together. So we've got our hub put back together, new rotor in place, and the new caliper bracket bolted on. Blue Loctite on the bolts, and we are setting up our caliper to go in place. Got the piston side pad in place, and we'll add a little pad grease to both these tabs where they slide into brackets, and go on and get the caliper set back in place. Well, there we have it, all buttoned up and back together. Got our new caliper, new line, and all that stuff put in place. I do not have the hard line ran for the front yet, so this is just clipped in the bracket, which I noticed also that someone had riveted this broken off bracket to the frame. So I'm gonna come back in here, clean this up, weld this bracket back on. But yeah, that pretty well sums up the front on this. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, as long as you're not getting into the actual knuckle, or where the inner bearings and everything are for the knuckle, which isn't too complicated there either, but we don't need to go that far into this one. I will be changing the oil in the front and rear diffs as well, but there's nothing real difficult about that either. So yeah, I think we're gonna wrap this one up here. Like I said, I'm not gonna bore you with the other side because it's pretty well the same process. So if you'd like to support the channel, I do have a PayPal account set up. The link to that is in the description of every video. I've got Super Thanks enabled also, so you can go that route if you want. Feel free to do so. If you got any comments, complaints, questions, what have you, drop them in the comment section below. If you haven't already, please subscribe. We appreciate you watching.